I think trade war, people tend to focus on the first word of that, which is trade. And it's really not about trade. It's really about what kind of world do we want to live in. When you look at everything, the full scope of everything that China does, it mixes in its own brand of expansive influence into its economics. And so it's not only the goods that we receive here, it's the principles too.
So, well, tell me a little bit more about that. What's at stake?
Well, what's at stake is our freedoms, are the principles that our country was founded upon, the principles that our international order was founded upon, are slowly being eroded by this hyper-connectedness of globalization and the internet. And China really understood how powerful openness was in terms of both economic development and growth, but also spreading its illiberal norms outward. We were so hubristic as Americans to believe, and we failed to recognize that over the years, over the long history of China, they've been invaded and conquered many times, and they have a unique ability to absorb those invaders and then slowly change them into Chinese. And so, in a sense, we thought we'd turn them into Americans, and really, in reality, what's happening is we're becoming more and more, and not Chinese, but certainly with the Chinese Communist Party, which is a Marxist-Leninist organization that's really a hybrid from what the Soviet Union was and actually what Nazi Germany was in terms of ideology and economics mixed in a way that is almost imperceptible with the way they distribute that. When you think of that in a globalized, internet-powered world, which, if you think of our founding fathers, we never had an internet. We didn't have globalization. They weren't things that they actually concerned themselves with, although they were worried about foreign influence. China has essentially operationalized those concepts for spreading or really suppressing any challenges to its rule in China. And the way it does that is by spreading oppression and suppression of freedoms, religion, speech, those things.
This is absolutely fascinating. So what do you make of the Chinese negotiators stepping away at the last moment at presumably Xi Jinping's behest recently?
So Liu He, educated in the West, understands global economics. To some extent, they've been able to hijack openness for their own means. And essentially the Trump administration said, and with Lighthizer negotiating, said no more. That has to stop. And if you think about this strategically from the Chinese perspective, they really only have one option here, and that is to further reform and open up. And so Liu He, I believe, recognized that. China needs access to capital, needs access to technology, needs access to innovation. The only place he can get that is in the West. And therefore, he had negotiated essentially an agreement which would allow for some opening and reforms. Well, that got back to the leadership, and they most likely met about whether or not they wanted to go along that path. And much like June 4th, 1989, they decided that they were going to go another way. The challenge now is, how do you play that with an administration that is absolutely determined to get an agreement that actually can be enforced? In my opinion, the way you play that is to push the regime out that's your foe. And so I believe they're betting on they can put enough harm into the U.S. economy that the 2020 elections go to somebody else.